And another edition, Summer Ball, coming your way. Hello, everyone. College football season right around the corner. I will allow our guest, Ryan Beef Coyle, to give us the exact countdown to Florida State and Georgia Tech, and, of course, in Ireland. A lot to discuss. Hello, everybody. Ready to go. College football, Summer Ball edition, all things Big Ten. Yes, we already hit on the SEC. We gave you a big old episode on everything realignment, and this is definitely front and center when it comes to the Big Ten, that's for sure, with the addition of USC and so on and so on. So we'll get into all of that, plus we'll talk about some of the expectations, the odds, and of course, joining us, only this time, a two-headed monster, Mark Henry Jr., dealing with getting married this weekend. Two out of the three guys know what that takes, so we understand why he is not on this edition of Summer Ball here. But we'll start with the man in the lower corner, Ryan Beef Coyle, who throws a hell of a tailgate. Hello, Ryan.
What's up, fellas? How are we? Yeah, 60 days away, traveling down the shore this weekend, and I will have my magazine in hand on the nice beaches of Avalon on Saturday afternoon. So looking forward to getting probably a nice hour read in on some college football.
Look who grew up. Weren't you a big Sea Isle guy last year? Or have you always been Avalon?
Nah, Sea Isle, but we go back and forth. But
okay.
Yeah, but that'll be my weekend college football study. And yeah, just this Saturday, another Saturday closer. And it's going to be here before we know it, because NBA draft tomorrow night, and then after that, for me, it's kind of all full gear towards college football. So looking forward to another day getting closer.
Yeah, Herb Street tweeted out on Saturday, 9 Saturdays. And also our returning champion, the one and only Mr. Joe Tansey. Joe?
There's about 5 more sporting events we got to get through before we even scratch the surface of college football.
I'm totally with you. I'm fired up for football. Don't get me wrong. Fantasy's starting to get me going a little bit here. Hold up. We got Olympics. We got Euros. We got a lot going on, of course, with the draft. I know we just put the bow on a few things. I get it, but there's still some other things in the sports schedule.
By the time that the Olympics finish, we'll be like right around the corner from college basketball, probably right around the corner from college basketball too. It starts so early. But we'll be right around the corner from the Ireland game. So there's plenty of time to get ready for college football, but it is going to sneak up on us. We're less than 2 months away now.
We are exactly that. All right. As always, we try and hit on anything and everything that has to do with the conference, from some of the transfers, the big names, new coaches. This one right here with the Big Ten, let's just talk about it. New teams, and front and center, USC for my money. Of course, the addition of Washington, the addition of Oregon, the addition of UCLA. And I don't believe I am missing anybody. If I am, please let me know. But Joe, I'll start with you. First things first, Big Ten 2024. First thing that goes to your mind is what?
Ohio State.
Why is that?
It's Ohio State's year. You can't talk about the Big Ten without Ohio State at this point. Everything, at least, look, they're the offseason champions of college football. You have to at least acknowledge what they've done. And I think they're now an example of what a program can do pretty much overnight in this version of college football, NIL, transfer portal, all of this, because they saw what the future was going to hold for them in the Peach Bowl, whatever bowl they were playing against Missouri.
Cotton Bowl, I believe.
They played Missouri. Their quarterbacks look awful. Everything just is full-blown panic mode in Columbus. And then what do? They lure Chip Kelly away from UCLA to be their offensive coordinator. They hit the transfer portal hard, and all of these events kind of lay in their favor now. Michigan is not going to be the juggernaut it was the last few years because Jim Harbaugh's gone. And a lot of the key components of that team are gone. There's still be some carryover with Sharon Moore there, but they're not going to be the national title winning team. Washington, same thing. They're coming into the conference, but I don't think anybody expects them to be top 3 in the conference because they lost a lot. Kalen DeBoer goes to Alabama. Jed Fish comes in. So now you have really 2 teams coming in USC and Oregon that are going to be able to measure up to the standard that Ohio State's going to lay down. And after that, I mean, it's kind of all there to figure out. What happens with Washington? What happens with Michigan? Where does Penn State fall in all of this, right? Because they've been number 3 in the Big Ten for, I mean, basically a decade at this point. But the new playoff, that benefits them because they are a top 12 program in the country. But now with the way the Big Ten is set up, can they elevate their level at least one more rung to be that 3rd best team in the Big Ten? It's going to be fascinating. And to me, if you look at the conference as a whole, I think the Big Ten, way more than the SEC, gets hurt in the middle to bottom tier of teams of even having a shot at the playoff at this point. I mean, look, the underbelly of the Big Ten hasn't been as good as the SEC, even remotely close, for years. But when you look at a team like Michigan State, Minnesota, Indiana, Purdue, I mean, where's the hope? Like, what's the actual goal here? Is it to win 6 games, get to a bowl game, be on national TV as much as possible, and rake in the TV money, and then hope lightning strikes like with Indiana when Penix was there? With Michigan State, I mean, they're in the middle of a 3 or 4 year reset because of the Mel Tucker situation. So to me, and this is coming from being just a diehard Big Ten fan, the middle class is going to be squeezed out even more in the Big Ten than it will be in the SEC. And you're going to see a huge gap in quality. Ohio State, USC, Oregon, Washington, Michigan, Penn State. And then, there are teams out there that 7th best in the Big Ten is going to be their ceiling. And that's kind of the depressing reality of where we're at with realignment.
Beef, I want to ask you about that because I know one team I heard a lot about, and I think even in episode 1 was Nebraska. From the Big Ten perspective, is there any team that Joe is leaving out from? Again, we know Ohio State, they're favored on DraftKings Sportsbook at plus 155. We know there's a big drop-off with Michigan, with Moore taking over for Harbaugh. What a tough spot for him to slide in there. I would even say that's probably more difficult to replace than Saban at this point in time. But again, that's a conversation for another day. Any other teams that Joe didn't mention, or do you see it as is? And Big Ten, what does it mean to you right now, Ryan?
Yeah, I don't believe Joe mentioned Wisconsin. I don't know how high I am on them. I still have to do a little bit more digging into what their offseason looked like. But Luke Fickell's track record as a coach has been a pretty successful one. This is year 2 at Wisconsin now. I'm intrigued to see what he can kind of bring that program to, because when you think about it, he left Cincinnati. They go into the Big 12. He had them already, I know, playing in the American and was able to lead them to an undefeated season. But still, he had that team producing out NFL talent, got them to the college football playoff, leaves for Wisconsin, which is looking at like an upgrade. You're supposed to be going, 9-3, 10-2, 11-1, competing at the top of the Big Ten. They actually have right now to make the Big Ten championship, the 6th best odds at 12-1 over on DraftKings right now. So I'm interested to see what they're in for this year. And I, like you said, Brace, at the beginning, I am really into this Nebraska team. I think they could be one of the resurgent kind of startup teams this year. Matt Rule, I think in his 2nd year historically at a new program, has upped his win total on an average of 5 wins per season throughout his time in college. So look for a big year 2, a leap. They had only 1 player enter the transfer portal, I believe it was, after their spring game. So a lot of roster attention there. One of the top quarterback prospects coming in. And Nebraska is going to be a fun team this year. And looking at their schedule, I think there's a legit shot they start out 7-0. So I think there's a few more players in the Big Ten than Joe thinks, but definitely there is kind of that cream of the crop with Ohio State and Oregon right now. And then I think in like a tier below, you probably put Penn State and Michigan.
So, but that's kind of my point I'm making, though. Like, I just mentioned 6 teams off the bat and totally forgot about Wisconsin, right? Like, that's the point I'm driving home here is we're talking about brand names: Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Washington, Oregon, USC. We're talking about them straight off the bat. Wisconsin, a team that traditionally wins 9-10 games a year, now that expectation that's always been there, at least for the last 2-3 decades, now has to be adjusted, right?
You think of the Big Ten, you think of Wisconsin. For some odd reason, for some people, I think of Wisconsin. You're right.
Because they've been very
The
consistent.
divisions too.
Yep. Yeah.
They greatly benefited from that. And hell, we didn't even mention
that out the
Iowa.
window.
We even mentioned Iowa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we're talking about two teams that have been really consistent in what they've been doing in the perspective of the Big Ten West. But now you open this up, man. Where do they fit? Like, I'm genuinely like asking, where do they fit in terms of not just this year, but from a broader football perspective? Like, are they the best of the third tier, and that's what their ceiling is? Like, sure, Luke Fickell's a very good coach, but there's so much congestion at the top where you need somebody to have a down year even to get to that 10 win mark. And maybe 10 wins isn't the standard anymore in the Big Ten, right? Maybe the standard's 9, and maybe it gets set after 1 year of the 12-team playoff to see where team number 11 ends up record-wise. But I think in the perspective of Wisconsin, you can add Penn State in here, you can add Iowa. Maybe you have to dial or reconfigure your expectations for what these programs actually can be. Because, sure, Wisconsin's going to have a fine team. They're going to have a lot of winning records, but they can't compete with Ohio State. They can't compete with USC, in terms of NIL money and pulling the transfer portal. So that's, to me, the most interesting aspect of the Big Ten, where we've had these teams that have been so competitive for so long, and they're immediately knocked down a rung on the totem pole, possibly two, depending on how you kind of view Washington in this whole mix, because they're going through a transition period and have had down years before. But that's kind of it. You're kind of proving my point where are these teams even going to be talked about? And 15th, 16th in the nation isn't good enough.
You're right. It's a whole different ballgame. It is. And it's crazy because as I'm looking at Ohio State's schedule here, guys, and Beef, I'll come to you on this one. I'm just looking at the newness. I'm looking at, okay, what is it like for a team? And I'm not trying to make it out to be the toughest trip ever. These guys know what it takes to compete against the best of the best. But for the first time in Ohio State's, in my mind, the recent history, they got to go to Oregon to play Oregon. That's not.
Well, they just played Oregon. Didn't they play home and home, or was that? Yeah, they just played Oregon.
At Oregon?
Was
it home and away?
Was it a home and home?
Okay.
Yeah, they just recently played each other.
All right, well then there's that one. So they got October 12th on the road against Oregon. So it's like, it's different, but in the same conversation, you do have teams that are not, obviously everybody can't play everybody. So Ohio State has to go on the road and take on Oregon. They don't have to play USC. Do we view that as a win? Like, how should we be viewing the schedule right now, Beef, in your mind, when it comes to certain teams that don't have to play, that don't have to travel to USC? But of course, there will be some new teams thrown into the mix as far as the schedule is concerned. And of course, moving forward. Now, these teams might have played recently that, obviously not fresh off the mind. But is there any advantage in your mind for some of these teams that if they're going to miss a USC, instead have to take on an Oregon or vice versa?
I think definitely from the consumer perspective to start off with, it's going to be awesome for us. Like we get USC, Penn State for a regular season game instead of, I don't know off the top of my head, but you can throw out like a Penn State, Maryland or something like that instead. Like we're getting great games like that. But then you're already hearing, like I was hearing Coward talk about it a couple weeks ago. Like USC had been trying to get out of this LSU matchup that they have in the non-conference at the beginning. It's week 1, I believe, this year. They were trying to get out of that, apparently, get it out of that contract, and LSU wouldn't budge. Coward was on the radio saying, or TV a couple weeks ago saying, Notre Dame and USC have to end that rivalry as well, because it's like, why do any of these big-time non-conference matchups when each week you're getting slammed? If you're USC, I don't know the schedule off the top of my head, but you have the potential to play Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, the whole 9 yards in one season. Like, why give yourself any chance to rack up a loss in the non-conference, because you're just going to have equal probably amount of opportunities to go and play within your own conference. So that is kind of the one big thing. So I think from a fan perspective, it's going to be fun. I think the product is definitely going to be better and more competitive. But from team scenarios, they got to be like, for lack of a better word, like crap. Like we're not rolling out of bed and getting to drive down to Maryland, College Park, Maryland, and play them. We got to go, play Penn State instead. Like there's not going to be many cupcakes, and I think that's just going to make for ultra competitive football. And home field advantage, I think, becomes more and more important than we've ever really seen it.
Yeah, they've released the opponents out to like 2028, and they've tried to balance it out where these teams aren't coming like all the way out west or east. So, for example, Oregon's furthest road trip this year is actually probably Purdue. They don't have to come closer to that. UCLA has got to be at Penn State. USC comes to Maryland.
I saw Rutgers plays like at USC at 11 o'clock on a Friday night.
But
like,
they also, I think that
awesome.
It's awesome. And it's because the World Series couldn't budge.
Wait, we have an 11 o'clock kickoff between USC and Rutgers
PM
on October the 25th. Yes,
yeah.
that is amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's obviously out in Southern California. Yeah.
But they've done a good job.
Yeah,
they've done a good job of balancing everything, though. So, for example, Rutgers goes out to USC, then they have a bye week and then a home game.
Nice.
So they're trying to, in the best way possible, make sure those advantages are kind of balanced out. I think the one big one that stands out to me is Washington's got to go to Iowa, they have a bye week, and then have to go to Indiana, then host USC, and then go to Penn State. So and they also have to go to Rutgers. So I think Washington feels the brunt of it the most this year. But
it's like NFL schedule,
right? It really is. But they've built out these opponents out to, I believe, 2028 in the Big Ten. They've already released it out in the public a few months ago. So I think that's their goal of trying to balance out the schedules of these 4 teams from the West Coast coming in. Obviously, there's going to be years where, like Washington this year, you just can't avoid it. But I think they're trying their best to make sure that you don't at least run a gauntlet of travel of opponents. It's going to be tough because this league's supposed to be really good, and that's the point of it. But in terms of travel, I think they're trying their best to make sure that it doesn't wreck everybody by week 11 or something like that.
Joe, with this, let's come back to you for Ohio State. Obviously, they're front runners, most talented team. I think we discussed that. They possibly could be the most talented team, top to bottom, even depth if you want to take it even further than that, as far as past starters. And then the schedule. It doesn't look like anything difficult is on this schedule from 30,000 feet up over here. Again, on the road against Oregon. You got at home against Nebraska, and you got on the road against Penn State. That could be a tough 3-week stretch. Not trying to get too ahead of myself here. Then they got Northwestern, then they got Indiana, and they close up shop against Michigan. Your thoughts on that schedule? Is that playing into your handicap as with anything, just as far as the expectations with this team? It seems like an easy schedule.
I mean, look, their season comes down to 3 games: Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan.
Gotcha.
I mean, look, Nebraska. Look. I'm not discrediting that rule, but a home game against Nebraska after a bye week should be penciled in as a victory for Ohio State. Like, let's just be honest with ourselves. There'll be a double-digit favorite close to it. That's just how this process works. Now, if Nebraska by the end of October is really good, potentially undefeated, that'd be awesome, right? But looking at it right now, that's a very clear win for Ohio State. So their toughest games are at Oregon. They go to Happy Valley, which looks like an ideal spot for a whiteout, and then Michigan, because it's the rivalry game, and there's going to be all the pressure on the world for Ohio State to win that game. There's going to be no pressure on Michigan in that game this year. So I think just like we talk about it with Alabama, with LSU, with all the SEC schools, that these teams' seasons come down to 3 games. It doesn't matter what they look like against Michigan State in their first conference game, as long as they win, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's really at the end of the day what matters. So I think that when you look at Ohio State's schedule, look, it's not the most difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say that. Getting Purdue, Indiana, Iowa at home is pretty good. but you got to win the games that matter, and that's what you're going to be measured on right now. And I think now, and this is, I guess this is what bugs me about the 12-team playoff. Ohio State can go 2-1 of those games and cruise into the playoff. There's not as much jeopardy.
Yeah.
No, I don't think we disagree with you on that one. And that they got one loss at the end, with all the expectation and buzz heading into the season. Yeah, they'll definitely be cruising right into.
If you have one loss in any conference, any of these Big Four conferences, you're in the playoff.
Yeah, definitely, and rightfully so. That's the way it should be too, right? Especially now
absolutely.
when you get all these teams in there. Beef, over to you. Let's talk a little bit about Oregon. Right now, DraftKings Sportsbook, that's the number 2 team, and it seems like it's a significant drop off from Penn State, who are third as far as odds are concerned here. They're at plus 500. Oregon plus 215. And again, Ohio State only at plus 155, so not that big of a drop off there. Your thoughts on the Ducks year 1 Big Ten?
Yeah, I'm really high on Dylan Gabriel getting the transfer there. I think he fits what Bo Nix did there at Oregon pretty seamlessly. I think he'll fill right in there. And Dan Lanning, I think he's kind of next up as maybe the coach of college football. Maybe not this year, but I do think it's on the way. They are, I think I saw some pretty early lines. I believe they're a 1 or 2 point favorite at home in that Ohio State game. So they are favored to win that game. Going to Oregon is never easy. But you also have to look where it kind of goes back to what Joe was saying, where like one loss, like even if Ohio State does go to Oregon and lose that game, there's probably still a good chance that they're meeting up in the Big Ten title game. Like that game in October or whenever it is doesn't matter nearly as much as the one that'll happen in the championship game, probably because that's the game that gets you one of those top 4 seeds and the bye at the end of the day. So I'm very high on this Oregon squad. I do think that they are a legit threat. Their non-conference, very easy. Idaho, Boise State, not a walk in the park, but that should be a pretty easy dub at Oregon State, who pretty much lost their entire program. They got a really, I think, easier kind of path in the Big Ten here as they host Ohio State, to Michigan, who I'm expecting to take a step back, hosting Washington, who I'm expecting to take a pretty big step back this year at least, and then at Wisconsin. That I'm interested to see what Wisconsin looks like at the end of November. But I think Oregon's schedule is a much easier than some of these other teams like a Georgia or an Alabama from the SEC. I think Oregon, if they win that Ohio State game, has the chance to potentially enter the playoff next year as the number 1 overall seed.
Are the conference title games going to matter?
I mean, doesn't it get the seed?
I don't think they have any bearing on.
I'm pretty sure it's whoever. Oh yeah, that's right. It's just the automatic berth, but not the overall seed, right?
Yeah,
from a gambling perspective, that's about it.
Will they matter? Because I mean, you have to assume that the top 2 teams in the SEC, ACC, Big 10, and Big 12 are all going to get into the playoff, right?
Yeah, but I would say like if Oregon and Ohio State met up in the final and just say Oregon won the regular season matchup, Ohio State won the conference championship, I think Ohio State would get the nod as the top 4 seed over Oregon. Get the bye.
I think it depends on how the games go, right? Because
the recency bias. I feel like that's what they give into more at the end of the season.
The committee always said they value those championship games, right? Will they still value them as much this year? I don't know, but that's what they said.
Like there won't be as much emphasis and onus on it, because if we look at what Alabama Georgia last year was like, basically Alabama won, kicked Georgia out. Like we're not going to be in that scenario, but still, I think teams will still be playing for the right to win that championship and just get the bye, one less game, because this is going to be a murderer's road to get through. I think 3 games probably to win the title instead of 2.
Would you rather see a 13th conference game or a conference title game?
I'm a conference title guy.
Yeah, conference titles still matter to me.
There's more to it, and pageantry, and obviously.
Because that's the road. That's the road these commissioners are going to go on.
I think eventually it's just going to be AFC Championship, NFC Championship style.
Right. Like they've got their 16 team conferences now. They've got all their TV money. They can do whatever the hell they want. I mean, look, you're billing the two best teams in the conference against each other for sure. So you can't project that when you make the schedule. Just throw it out there because this is looking forward to like the next decade of college football. That's kind of what the situation is going to be like. You know, they're gonna question everything.
All right, let's keep it moving because we're going to go about 40 minutes. We're halfway through into this. Joe, back over to you. Tee you up on Penn State. Talk to me about the Nittany Lions. No Michigan on the schedule this year, which is a plus, but now you got USC. Your thoughts on Penn State this year?
That's not a plus this year.
That's true. That's true. But they can't beat Michigan, correct?
Well, they can't beat anybody in the top 10. So what does it matter?
Well, so if USC is in there, they're not going to beat them. But yes,
USC's in the top 10. James Franklin's not going to beat them. So
hey, look,
what does it matter?
Well, you had Ohio State and you had Michigan on that schedule, and you never were able to get. Penn State was never able to get past it. So remove Michigan this time. Ohio State's still there for them. Your thoughts on the Nittany Lions though this year?
I mean, look, the formula is still the same though, right? Because if they just lose those two games to USC and Ohio State,
they're in good shape.
They're a 10-2 football team and they're in the playoff.
That's it.
Right? So like,
yep.
Does it matter?
Well, it definitely matters. Why are we playing the games?
Yeah.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, if we're gonna look at Penn State in a different lens, right? Are we really though? Because the expectation for them is always been 10, 11 wins. But this time around, though, if you're the 11th best team in the country, you're in the playoff and you have a shot, and that's really all that matters, that you have a shot and you're in the field. And, you know, in the past, 6-7 years, it's just meant, oh, you have a nice little trip to a New Year's Six bowl, you travel well, you get your split of the bowl take, and you move on to next year, right? Like, I don't know if it sounds really harsh, but it kind of sounds like nothing's really changing except you get into a playoff. Like, if the status quo holds, third best team in the Big Ten, maybe the fourth best team gets in.
Well, it sounds like to me that it's a slam dunk at -130 to make the playoffs. Then we need to make that wager then.
I mean, look, if Drew Aller is able to take that next step up, right, and these running backs continue on their way, yeah. I mean, the expectation is at bare minimum 10-2, and look, they got, I guess, one tough game if you want to look at it at Wisconsin, but if you view Washington in a rebuilding year, I mean, that run up after the Ohio State game is very, very easy. And we just sit here, 6 months from now or 5 months from now, saying the exact same thing about Penn State, with the caveat being they get into the playoff now.
James Franklin, coach of the year. He's in the playoffs.
And that's what I'm talking about, where perspectives change with the new era of college football, right? Because we mentioned Wisconsin earlier. Well, their perspective on life changes completely because they're probably going to get boxed out of the top 5, top 6, and have to be okay with playing in the Citrus Bowl or the Outback Bowl every year, which is what they've already been doing. You know, nothing changes for them. But for somebody like Penn State, I mean, you're going into a different echelon now because they open the door to 7 more power conference teams.
Well, we'll see what Penn
I'm going to
State
get a lot of
can
crap for saying that from the other group,
absolutely.
by the way. Oh, absolutely.
I believe it. That's all right. Beef, let's talk about the reigning national champions and how life is going to be extremely difficult without their head coach and quarterback and then some. Should there be any expectations behind this team at all?
It's a pretty big cleaning of the house. I mean, not only did DeBoer go, but Grubb, the OC, left as well. He's with the Seahawks now, calling the plays. Michael Penix, Romadunze. I mean, those guys were just freaks on the offensive side of the ball this year. They do bring in Will Rogers from Mississippi State, another guy that feels like he's been in college for about 7 years now. I think he has the all-time passing record in the SEC. So it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of transitions to playing in a style that isn't RIP Mike Leach, but isn't an air raid offense. and going and playing with Jed Fish. But Jed Fish and what he did last year at Arizona was pretty impressive. But it's not like he's just retaining a roster that went to the national championship last year. A lot of obvious key pieces left that squad. So I think Jed Fish, what he showed at Arizona, is kind of more of a builder. It might take this might be a reset year, maybe 6-6, 7-5. Don't expect Washington to be back kind of in the playoff picture this season, but I do expect them to kind of be maybe like a Wisconsin, a 9-3, a 10-2 type team in the Big Ten going forward. But I also feel like Washington last year was not a come out of nowhere team, but it was, definitely not expected to see them in the national championship at the beginning of the year. You would have thought a team more so like USC probably would have been with Caleb Williams back. So that also gives me kind of optimism that there is a team out of this new kind of bunch in the Big Ten that could emerge eventually. So the Washington scenario is going to be one to watch, but there hasn't been any hype around them or Michigan, and that's pretty wild with both of them coming off national title appearances.
One thing we do know is that Washington, I believe, has never been to Happy Valley. I believe, if I'm safe at saying that. They
Back
will
in
make the trip.
I think 47 they played.
Oh, how about that? There you go. Nice. Well, good. So Beef gave us Washington on that one. Joe, back to you. Talk to me about Michigan, the reigning national champions. Everybody's writing them off. Is that fair? Should we do that? Should there be any expectations? What's the outlook for Michigan this year in your mind?
I think you can kind of copy and paste everything Beef just said about Washington and apply it to Michigan in a way, right? Because everybody's expecting the drop off. The only difference here is the same system is in place. Sharon Moore helped Harbaugh build this system, so it's still going to be the Michigan identity, right? I think that's important to note when you're comparing these two teams. Yes, there's going to be a drop off between both teams, but with Michigan, they're better suited this year to succeed, whatever that number of wins is, because they just have a system in place. Now, I don't expect them to be in the top 3, right? I think that's reserved for Ohio State, USC, and Oregon. But where do they fall in that second grouping of teams is going to be very fascinating. And yeah, it's very weird talking about a team with that is the defending national champion that just has nothing, right? In terms of hype when it comes to the national championship. It's very bizarre. And look, they play their first 5 games at home, but that's deceiving because Texas and USC are 2 of those teams, right? So this is a team that I know we just talked about it with Penn State being like 2 losses and bury him and not bury him. But in the case of Michigan, 2 early losses could actually bury them, right? Because you look at the way the schedule is set up. So I think it's going to be very weird talking about a national championship team with very low expectations. But I think that's kind of the reality. And if Michigan is there, I won't be completely surprised because, like I said, the system is still in place. And it's not a complete overhaul of the program like Washington's going through. But it's still going to be fascinating to watch how Sharon Moore puts his own stamp on the program.
Beef, over to you. Let's talk some players. Who's the best quarterback in this conference in your mind?
I'd go Gabriel, Dylan Gabriel from Oregon. He's my I think I might be a little bit higher on him than others, but I just think he's a really good playmaker, and the accuracy that he's shown over the past couple of seasons, I think is going to fit right in with what Bo Nix did, because I think Bo Nix completed about 72% of his passes last year. You just have to learn how to be efficient in that Oregon offense, and they got guys in space. So as long as you can get the ball into your playmakers' hands, they're going to be good.
All right, Joe Tansey, best quarterback in the conference.
I think you have to go with Gabriel, but I think I think the caveat here is, and I know we talked about Will Howard at Ohio State a few weeks ago. The caveat to that is if he picks up Chip Kelly's offense. I think that's the biggest thing with Ohio State, right? If they have all this talent, but it's still a new system coming in. They're adjusting to Chip Kelly on the fly. And I think that will give them more success because I think Chip Kelly is one of the top 5 offensive minds ever in the history of college football. And I don't think anybody can really debate that. So they're going to improve offensively. They're not going to look stagnant. They're going to look different. Look, they have talent coming out the ass at wide receiver every year, right? I mean, they're between them and LSU each year is the debate of wide receiver U. They have Henderson and Judkins in the backfield, which we talked about Judkins transferring from Ole Miss. It was a weird one, but that's how NIL money works. I mean, they are positioned to do everything. And if Will Howard can be a step up, I think, from where he was at Kansas State, that will translate well. But in terms of just pure talent quarterback, it's got to be Dylan Gabriel. I'd love to see Drew Allard make that next step, though, at Penn State.
Yeah.
I think everybody had so many expectations. Right. Everybody had so many expectations when he took over last year, and quite frankly, he kind of let everybody down in the big games.
Yep.
And kind of went along with the flow at Penn State. So if he can take that next step up and be the difference maker at quarterback, I mean, that changes a lot of things too.
13 games last year for Aller. He was threw for a little over 2,600 yards, 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So plenty to improve on, but not bad numbers there. But you're right. It came up small in the big games. That's what I would take away from that.
That's really all that matters.
Yep. Beef, over to you. Running back. We talking about Reggie Love. Who's the best running back in this conference in your mind?
You got 2 good ones to pick from. They're both in the Ohio State backfield there with Henderson and Judkins. But I think Donovan Edwards out of Michigan gets unleashed this year. With Blake Corum now gone to the NFL. I think he's with the Rams. They kind of used him as a bell cow last year, but Edwards, when his number was called, was ready to go. So he's a guy that has plenty of tread on the tires. He's going to kind of be unleashed this year. And I'm expecting this Michigan team too, as Joe was saying, with the system still in place. I mean, Sherrod Moore kind of was born and bred with Jim Harbaugh, came up with him, rebuilt that Michigan team. Why go away from what won you the national title? Let's lean on this running game. Their new quarterback coming in, Alex Orji. He's another guy who's a really good athlete. That's going to be a really dynamic rushing attack. Donovan Edwards, he's a guy, I don't know his Heisman number right now, but he's probably a guy that's going to be worth a look just based off of volume of touches alone. And if Michigan does find a way to surprise and maybe go like 10-1, 10-2, 11-1, they're good enough to be in that conversation. Donovan Edwards, I think, is going to have a couple 150 to almost 200-yard rushing games. So he's a beast in the backfield that's going to get unleashed this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good take on that one. Joe, as far as wide receivers are concerned, who's replacing Mark?
I was going to sip the syrup on the running backs here. And I mean, look,
go ahead.
There's 1,600 returning yards at Penn State.
Hello.
Yeah.
I mean, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are probably the second best running back duo behind what Ohio State has. I mean, that's how they're gonna win games. It's how they've won games. I mean, if you're a Penn State fan, look, I mean, I say this every year. You got plenty to hope for. At least you have that.
Yeah. And like we just discussed with Aller and they have a wide receiver over there too. What the heck's his name from Penn State?
Lambert Smith.
Is that who I'm thinking of?
Yeah, he was their best one last year.
All right. Staying with wide receivers, Joe. Let's talk about Ohio State. Who's replacing Marvin Harrison Jr.? How do you see that working out?
I mean, look, Emeka Egbuka has been there for a few years now. He's a redshirt junior, and he's been the guy. He's been number 2 or number 3, but I mean, he was as highly touted of a recruit as some of the guys that have already have graduated to the NFL. So, I mean, look, from an immediate standpoint, you look at him and look, they're going to run guys in on this factory. Carnell Tate showed some flashes last year, but starting the year, at least Egbuka is the guy. I mean, he's been around forever at this point. He's lasted longer than most wide receivers do at Ohio State. I think it was a smart gamble for him to come back knowing that he'd be the guy and you're the next on this factory belt to the NFL.
Beef, how do you see the wide receiver position playing out at Ohio State?
Jeremiah Smith was the number 1 recruit this past year at 24/7 Sports. He's going to Ohio State to play receiver. So they don't usually throw guys in kind of right away. I remember, I think it was the Rose Bowl against Utah a few years ago that I forget who the 2 guys in front of him were that sat out, but that's when Marvin Harrison and JSN had their breakout.
Olave and Wilson, I think.
Yeah, Olave and Wilson sat the bowl game out. Marvin Harrison Jr. Jackson Smith and Jigba go off. I mean, I think Smith and Jigba had almost 300 receiving yards that game. So that was pretty wild. But their like actual number one recruit in that group was Julian Fleming, who never really panned out at Ohio State. Brace actually transferred to Penn State. He's a Central Columbia guy, which is like right out there in the middle of the state. So
it was a big deal when he chose Ohio State over Penn State.
Yeah.
And now it's an even bigger deal that he's coming home.
Yeah, homecoming for him. He could be kind of looked at as the hero there if he helps get them over the top, because if he emerges and he can be what he was hyped up as, the number one recruit, that's going to make Drew Aller that much better. So Julian Fleming, he's got a lot of pressure on his shoulders this year as well, because former number one guy, he's last chance this year. This is his fifth year, I believe. So this is his last chance to make his NFL push as well.
I think that Utah game was the Britton Covey game, wasn't it?
Yep.
Was that the game that he went off? What a game that was. That was a great game. Joe, back over to you. When you think of Big Ten football over the years, you think about defense. You think about tough, hard nose. Is that out the window now? Is it just a new era, completely new era in the Big Ten?
No, I think it's just a different collection, right, of playmaking. I mean, look, if you turn on an Iowa-Minnesota game in mid-November, you're still getting 13 to 10.
Yes.
Like that part,
Iowa,
it ain't changing.
Yeah. Will Iowa be just as bad this year on offense?
No, they can't.
A little bit better.
It's impossible.
You literally cannot be that bad.
That's
again.
A good call. That's a good call. Defensively, they were great, though. Will they be as good on defense?
Yeah, they'll be fine defensively. They always are.
Okay. Yeah.
Who is the new OC there? Who did they wind up bringing in?
I forget, but isn't the kid that isn't McNamara? Because he got hurt, right?
Yeah, he's going to be back. I think it was like a broken leg.
Yeah.
All right.
They were supposed to be good offensively last year.
Yeah.
And then McNamara got hurt.
Well, it's never good when your offensive coordinator gets worked into his contract that you have to have a certain amount of points per game, a certain amount of yards per game to keep your job, and you're the coach's son.
As we always said, we said at the beginning, little top heavy, of course, and that's no slight against the teams like Rutgers and Northwestern.
Rutgers is coming.
We're sliding them.
We are.
No,
okay.
They're good. They're not good.
Any chance that we get maybe some team like Rutgers, like UCLA, like Minnesota rowing the boat, Northwestern, Illinois, Purdue, any one of those teams, any chance that we get some magic? I just heard Joe say no.
No,
Beef,
just
anything from you.
Don't even waste your time asking the question.
How about this? Will they be a tough out for somebody?
I think Rutgers is coming. I think they are. I don't know what you want to define that as, but
hey, you can hear our signal out there. You can hear our signgle out there. All right. So
I'll buy your Rutgers basketball stock. I will not buy your Rutgers football.
They just got their fourth. They just got their fourth ESPN 300 recruit the other day. They're coming. Don't sleep on Rutgers. Not this year, maybe, but I do think they're going to be kind of in that middle tier pack, not at the bottom.
But that's where they're expected to be. They're not
where the middle. New.
Yeah, that's
no,
where
they're not. That's where all of the at the bottom.
That's where all of these teams want to be. They all want to be in the middle. It's an
18-team conference. Someone has to be at the bottom,
and that will probably be Northwestern.
I thought last year that was going to be Northwestern, and look at them. They
had a pretty good year last year, eh? Yeah.
After everything that happened, I will say though, because we're getting up on the time, the books. DraftKings, Vegas, they hate USC, despise them. I think they're underdogs in like 6 games. They're a 10-point underdog at Michigan and a 4-point home underdog to Penn State. 6-point underdog, I think, 2 to LSU. Like the books.
I mean, they did lose Caleb Williams.
Yeah. Will they be the biggest disappointment in the conference this year?
I think the brand and like kind of the hype coming in, everyone's expecting them to kind of be right up there, but they lost Caleb Williams. They still went 7-5 last year. It was the freaking defense that was an automatic over bet every game. They gave up
them in LSU
56-28 the first game, 66-14, 56-10, 42-28. I mean, it just goes on and on. They lost 5 out of 6 regular season games to end the season. Like that was not any good momentum. I know Caleb Williams aside, no good momentum heading into this year. I am interested to see if Miller Moss is the quarterback, though. 372 yards and 6 touchdowns in the bowl game. But that defense needs to pick it up because they do not have the style of play to fit with the big boys in the Big Ten right now.
I mean, what's your
All right.
what's your expectation for USC? Like that's kind of just
What's mine or what's USC's?
I mean, yeah, like
fans?
what's the overall expectation? Because if they're
I think USC expects to be competing for national titles. You're paying your coach $110 million, but you're coming into the conference of the big boys and you want to play finesse ball, you're going to get pushed around. And I think they could be in for a rude awakening yet again. But people are expecting kind of just like Texas over the past few years until they've figured it out. But you're expecting the brand USC, be a top 10 team, be competing for national titles. I think they definitely are going to have a rude awakening. I'd say, yeah, Brace, I'll put my stamp on that USC is going to be the biggest disappointment in the conference this year.
Interesting. All right, we'll get you both out of here on this one. Do you both have Ohio State winning the conference?
I have Ohio State versus Oregon in the championship game.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's very clear.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real room for a hot take in this one. I think, keep it simple. Maybe Penn State, if things break their way, if they find a way to beat Ohio State at home.
No, it's June 25th. I'll do this right now.
Yes.
I'll tell you exactly what Penn State's going to do this year.
All right.
They're gonna cover the spread against
marking the tape
against every team that is in the top 10. Why? Because they've done this. It's not like this is how Penn State works. They beat everybody else into oblivion. They're probably going to look pretty decent against West Virginia. Franklin knows what the point spreads are. Hell, we knew that from last year's opener against West Virginia when he had the backups running the offense. So they'll probably rank top 10 ATS record again this year. They'll lose the 2 games they're supposed to lose. They'll be incredible to bet on. They'll be a cash cow. And then we'll talk about them as the third best team in the Big Ten. Only thing that changes, though, that gets you in the playoff this year. That actually is good enough compared to every other year.
What a crazy change to all things college football. A lot of changes, but there's nothing bigger than that. The 12-team playoff. Well, once again, a fantastic episode getting you all caught up on everything college football. Big Ten edition. We are 1 month away from the Big Ten Media Day. How about that? Put that on your calendar out there.
Are they doing that in the pool in Indianapolis? Are they just keeping the pool there in the Colts Stadium for the Big Ten to use?
That's exactly what they're doing. Lucas Oil Stadium. You called it. They do have it broken up. Oh yeah, exactly. Where it goes all the way across the country this time.
If I don't get a new map commercial this year, I'm going to be very disappointed.
They do have it broken down to 3 different days, 6 teams per day. So it's not just mayhem, but it's 3 days, media day, media week at Lucas Oil Stadium for all things Big Ten. Fantastic stuff across the board. J Tansey 90 on socials. Ryan Coyle 35, of course, known as Beef. Always a pleasure, boys. Can't thank you enough. Good luck on all those plays. Fire on a Gabriel Heisman Trophy Award winner. And, of course, take Ohio State versus Oregon for the championship game in the Big Ten. And let the people know where you heard it right here on Fox Sports Gambler. As always, if you missed anything, be sure to check us out online at foxphlgambler.com.